Hi, I'm Maria Thea Harris, or Velo Sews on social media. Welcome back to Sew Organised Style podcast, featuring textile artists with the upcoming Making Zen online retreat from the 27th of May to the 31st of May. Grab a cuppa and relax with us. So if someone was to say, "Oh, Trixie, I like the idea of a softie. What is a softie?"
Good question. A softie is a stuffy or a plushie or a soft toy.
You can hear the joy in the voice of Trixi Symonds. She's the textile artist who's providing her perspective for the Making Zen online retreat about teaching kids and adults to hand sew. As Kate Ward said, she selected tutors for the retreat who are textile artists. We get to learn one skill from them, but we certainly get an inside look into how textile artists put their whole selves into their works. Let's listen to Trixie now. Where can we find you online?
You can find me at Sew Softie. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. I've got a really, really lovely Facebook group, Sew Softie Facebook group, where people can come, ask questions, show what they've made. It's a really lovely, really friendly, really sweet group. And you can also find me on YouTube, where I post lots and lots of free tutorials showing people how to do all different sorts of stitches and sew different sorts of projects.
It sounds like a really lovely group on Facebook, and having all of those tutorials would really make it easy to get through the projects that you've got for us.
Yeah, my main aim is inspiring parents to sew with their kids. I actually started 30 years ago teaching kids craft classes. One of the parents at my kids' school asked me if I could teach craft classes after school. So I said, yeah. And I started, and there's only a little bit of sewing in those classes. And then slowly the sewing became more prominent in the classes.
Right.
I saw that the kids really, really loved sewing. So I just changed my classes. They completely turned around and they were just sewing classes. So my main focus is, because I love teaching kids to sew. I saw that kids really, really loved to sew, and it was really good for kids. They got this feeling of, aren't I amazing? I've just made this all by myself. So I had this idea back in about 2013, 14. I said to my husband, I'd really like to teach kids all over the world how to sew, because I thought, this is amazing. Okay. And I started in 2016 something called Sew a Softie. And the idea of that was just to inspire adults to sew with their kids. I found that in my classes, a lot of the mums would come and say, oh, I wish I could sew with my kids. I can't even sew on a button. So that was my aim to Sew a Softie, was to inspire parents or adults, teachers to sew with their kids by showing them, or giving them at least, really, really simple projects to sew. So that was how Sew a Softie started. And so I developed actually a very, very simple to sew. Like when you see a softie, it's got lots of bits and pieces in it. And I wanted to design a softie that was easy for kids to sew, and that was also going to be easy for parents to sew with their kids. And especially if they thought they couldn't sew, they weren't going to be overwhelmed by a project that had too many pieces or too many things to sew in it. So I designed a softie called a Zenki. And a Zenki is just basically two pieces of felt with a running stitch around the torso. So the back of the Zenki actually has the arms and the legs and whatever sort of as part of the whole Zenki idea. And the front is just the torso with a running stitch. So the idea was, it's really simple. Running stitch was an easy stitch to do. And also running stitch is a very quick stitch, so that when parents were teaching or showing kids how to sew, it wasn't going to be a project that took hours and hours to make. That was my sort of idea when I started Sew a Softie. That's what I do.
So if someone was to say, "Oh, Trixie, I like the idea of a softie. What is a softie?"
Good question. A softie is a stuffy or a plushie or a soft toy. I think mostly in Australia we call it softies, but not everybody. But I think in America they call it plushies, stuffies. And there's another word I've heard in England. I can't remember what it was, but yes, a softie is a soft, squishy little toy, and it's a great friend for kids and adults.
Oh, thank you.
Now we know what a softie is. Very important question.
I just thought, I love the idea of a softie. But does everybody know what a softie means?
Oh, yes. No, they don't.
Yeah. I love the fact that you are focusing on running stitch as the stitch for adults to teach children, because that's applicable for a lot of things, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. I really love the running stitch. I sort of just love that, the up and down movement, and it's really relaxing. Kids sit there. I love it when I have my classes. The kids are sitting there and sewing and they're chatting to each other. And I've actually had kids in the class actually sewing the same project together, which is so sweet. And it's just a really relaxing stitch that kids master fairly quickly. There's not too much that can go wrong with it. So love it. It could be used also as a decorative stitch, but I'm a fan of a running stitch.
It's quite applicable to any sort of thread type as well, isn't it, when you use a running stitch?
Yes, actually, that's interesting because a lot of people use embroidery thread when they sew. I actually like to use ordinary sewing thread to do running stitch, because what I do is I get the kids to double over the thread, tie it in a knot. Because one of the frustrating things when you're a little kid is if that needle keeps pulling off your thread. I use that ordinary sewing cotton. It's great. It doubles over. But, sometimes people want to use thicker threads, and that's fine too. I like using the embroidery threads when I sew on facial features on my softies. So that thicker thread is nice for facial features. But yeah, any thread works really great.
Because I was thinking for little fingers, running stitch would be fun to learn to do. And it would be a very forgiving stitch if you were using not just normal thread, but even wool on felt with a really big needle.
Yeah, I get my kids to use smaller needles.
Right.
Because I think, kids have got very, their little fingers, they're very good at the fine motor skills off and they hold them. So I actually get kids to use chenille needles, the smaller chenille needles, like a 20, 22, because I find that, first of all, they're really, really good at using the needle. And also they need a pointy needle, because sometimes parents would use those thick, blunt needles when they're sewing with kids. It makes it really hard for kids to sort of push the needle in and out of their felt. So if they're using a sharp needle, although some parents worry about kids hurting themselves, which I've found that the kids are fine with, the parents worry more than the kids, but that sharp needle, it goes really in and out of the felt quite easy. So it makes sewing really relaxing, really fun, and just easy for kids. And the easier they find it, or the more they're going to want to come back and sew. And I like the chenille needles because that large eye, which makes threading easier for kids and adults too, actually.
That's true. So when it comes to needles and threading, do you also provide the notion or the aid to help people thread needles?
You can get those needle threaders, but what's really, really good for teachers who have a class of kids who don't have funds for needle threaders, you can get a little piece of paper. I'm using inches here, about an inch by half an inch. I guess it's 2 centimeters by 1 centimeter. You fold that little piece of paper in half. You make sure that it goes through the eye of the needle, and you can just put your thread in that little piece of paper, which is like a sort of, I guess, a book idea, and thread it through your needle. Put the thread through the paper, thread it through your needle, and you've got an easy way for kids to thread their needles. Because one of the difficulties is for kids is threading and tying knots. So I have lots of tutorials on YouTube for that reason, just to show teachers different ways they can thread a needle with their kids or students. And also those knots are very, very difficult for kids. So we've got a few tutorials on showing parents and teachers simple ways to help kids tie knots.
And adults too.
And adults. The funny thing is, I often say, this is a great tutorial for kids. And I'll get a lot of comments saying, and adults too.
Good. So Trixie, what do you like working with the most?
Oh, I love working with felts. It's easy to sew with lots of colors. It doesn't need to be turned right side in. It's just so nice and squishy to hold and soft. So yeah, I'm a fan of felt.
No wonder you're into squishies with felt.
Oh yeah.
We've got the Making Zen online retreat coming up, and you're going to be one of the teachers.
Yes.
What can we look forward to from your tutorial for the Making Zen online retreat?
Okay, so I'm going to be showing people how to make a really simple cat softie or cat stuffy. The idea of my cat stuffy is, for adults, if they want to make it, it's a really, really quick softie to make if they want a gift or something that they need to make very quickly. It's also great for beginner sewers because, again, it's the Zenki type of softie made of 2 pieces of felt. The tutorial is a great way if any of the people joining in the tutorial want to sew with their kids, grandkids, or if they're a teacher. This is that simple Zenki idea of showing people how they can sew a softie that's really simple. It's just got the running stitch around the torso. The cat softie that I'm actually going to demonstrate in my tutorial is what I call a second gen Zenki. So normally a Zenki will have just one color on the front or one piece of felt on the front. And I'm showing people, okay, no, you can get that one piece of felt and you can cut it in half and use 2 different colors. So it just adds another creative dimension to the softie to show people, okay, so here's another way of making my cat softie. And for more experienced sewers, they can add all sorts of embroidery or other designs to their softies. So it's just a little cat softie that's going to be a quick sewing project and fun for people to make with their kids.
For the Making Zen online retreat, one of the fun parts is the Facebook group of people who attend the retreat. I know from being part of that group that once people get the basics from your tutorial, there are going to be so many more cat softies.
Oh, I love the idea.
So many, and very creative, and a lot of people will use not just what's from your tutorial, but from others as well. So I already know that Facebook group is just going to explode with ideas this time around.
I just love it. This is why I like this sort of Zenki, because it's a very basic pattern. And even in my classes, when I see kids, I give them all the same basic pattern to sew, and they all look completely different. What the kids add, the color choices, and, it opens up. The simpler things are sometimes the more creative the possibilities are. This little cat softie that I'm going to show people how to make has lots and lots of creative possibilities. I can't wait to see what other people do with it. It inspires me when I see what other people make with my designs. I love it.
Do people who are going to be watching your video, will they need to buy a lot of resources to be able to come up with their Zenki cat?
No, there's belts, needle thread, some pins, and a little bit of stuffing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so there's not much needed there. Yeah, it's accessible to everybody. That's one of the reasons I love teaching kids to hand sew, is because it's basically accessible to kids everywhere. You don't need a sewing machine. You can just sit there. You've got your fabric, needle, thread, and you can sit and sew. And like I said before, what I love is just in my classes when the kids just are sewing and chatting, and it's just such a lovely, scene to have them all sitting there.
Sounds like a good environment for kids to be in.
Oh, I think it's so good for kids. I could rave about how good I think sewing is for kids for a long time, but...
What advice would you give to people who are thinking of taking part in the retreat this time?
Join in, have fun. Sewing's just, hand sewing is just an amazing, amazing skill to have.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maria. It was lovely chatting and meeting you.
Lovely to meet you, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Maria. Have a nice day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
This episode for the Making Zen online retreat on Organised Style podcast was produced by me, Maria Thea Harris, with permission of Trixi Symonds and Kate Ward. Sound by bensound.com. To register for the Making Zen online retreat, there's a link in the show notes, as well as on our podcast page and on our podcast Instagram account. Make sure you book in to the Making Zen online retreat using those links. You can subscribe to Sew Organised Style podcast, but with an S, not a Z, on all good podcast apps. Make sure you go back and listen to our free Making Zen podcast archive. And if you can, consider supporting the production of this podcast on Patreon. In the show notes, there's a link so that you can register for the Making Zen online retreat. It's free to watch for the first 24 hours of every day from the 27th to the 31st of May. We look forward to joining you in your sewing room next time. Stay safe, everyone.